His real mandate was to protect secrecy, liberals, and the Trudeau family.
Justin Trudeau has something to hide.
He doesn't want the facts to get in the way of a good political argument.
Former Governor General David Johnston determined this week Canada should not hold a public inquiry into foreign elections meddling. The Prime Minister wants that to be the last word, but like you heard there, the opposition isn't buying it. The Conservatives, NDP and Bloc are all still demanding an inquiry, and both Tory leader Pierre Poilievre and Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet say they will not look at top-secret documents Johnston used to reach his conclusion. Let's bring in the front bench panel to unpack the politics of that. With me this evening, former Nova Scotia Premier Stephen McNeil. He's now a strategic business advisor for the law firm Cox & Palmer in Halifax. Former Alberta Premier Alison Redford. She's now the principal at the Redford Group. Former Ontario NDP MPP Guratan Singh. He's now vice president at Crestview Strategy. And also we are disclosing the brother of federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. And CTV National News' Ottawa bureau chief Joyce Napier is here as well. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. The fallout today is primarily, Alison, focused on this offer of David Johnston to have opposition leaders have access to the documents he used to reach the conclusions that he did. The opposition leaders say that prevents us from being able to speak freely on this moving forward, and that's something that the Prime Minister would enjoy. That's how they're characterizing it, and we heard the way the Prime Minister is characterizing it, that's kind of a choice to hide behind ignorance. Where do you fall on the issue?
Well, I remember many years ago when Joe Clark was leader of the opposition, and the former Prime Minister Trudeau was Prime Minister. We had a Canadian ambassador in Iran. Joe Clark did agree to be briefed on national security issues, was told that Ken Taylor, the Canadian ambassador in Tehran, was protecting American diplomats, and as a result of that was criticized publicly in Canada because he had that information and he couldn't therefore pursue in the House of Commons a rigorous criticism of the government. And so therefore, I think that the political leaders in the House who are not agreeing to be briefed and brought into the Privy Council process are doing something that's very important, because the parliamentary process requires political leaders to be able to hold the Prime Minister and the government to account. And I'm sure the Prime Minister would very much like it if the opposition weren't able to do that, because under parliamentary tradition, if they were sworn in, they wouldn't be able to use any information that they had received through that process. And I think it would then stifle and preempt the parliamentary process. So I agree with the leaders in the House who are not in government that it would compromise their role in the parliamentary process.
Stephen, what do you think of that? And it's interesting because the Prime Minister, I noted today, was kind of fired up on the issue, right? He was quick to say that means you're choosing to hide behind a veil of ignorance. But I think the point that Alison makes, that it would hinder your ability to talk about any of that and to kind of perform your function in Parliament, is also true.
She is, but let's talk about the politics of this. The reality of it is, this is probably the decision that David Johnston made, who I believe made it with good intentions and with the facts that he knew and presenting. Is probably the worst political decision for the Prime Minister. I mentioned this last week. I think this would be the worst outcome for them. And I believe that the decisions and voices they've heard from the opposition is not surprising, and it has nothing to do with holding the government to account. They've taken the pulse of Canadians, and Canadians want an inquiry. That decision, in my view, has been made by them, and politically, anything short of that will be damaging. And the sooner that the decision is made on what that inquiry is going to look like and what the format's going to look like, I think we'll be better off for the government. The longer this drags on, the two opposition leaders will do what they're going to continue to do and use this issue for political purposes. And we will be in a position where I think the wish of the Canadian population will still be there and played out over the next number of months and heading into an election campaign. So I think from a government point of view, David Johnston's decision was the worst one that could have come forward. And now the Prime Minister, if he doesn't soon call this inquiry, I think will be offside with the Canadians.
Well, we sort of already, Garatan, have some evidence of of exactly what Stephen is laying out. Basically, that the fact, and it's fair to note that while David Johnston came to that conclusion, the Prime Minister could have come to another one. He said he would heed the recommendations of Mr. Johnston, but he could have said, you know, at any point, actually, I take his point, but I'm going to call an inquiry. We see today that it's not like the issue has in any way been put to bed, right? In fact, the opposition leaders were even more fired up than they were 24 or 48 hours ago. So to Stephen's point around the politics of it all, do you agree with the idea that not choosing to pursue an inquiry, whatever the merits of that decision, is tough politically?
It's tough politically, but I also think it's the wrong decision for Canadians. Like, we're talking about our democracy right now. We're talking about something that is so fundamental that irrespective of our political beliefs, we all agree on one thing: democracy is important. It's a foundation for our society. And the fact that there are Canadians across this nation who are facing this kind of intimidation, this kind of foreign interference from foreign entities, from nations outside of Canada who have terrible human rights track records, nations like India, China, Russia, Iran, who are actively engaged in these actions towards Canadians. And, you know, irrespective of Mr. Johnston's his decision today, the reality is that there's huge segments of the Canadian population right now who are still feeling uneasy, who are still feeling like, you know, their position in Canada is being compromised by the harmful action of foreign nations. And to protect our democracy, that's why we need a public inquiry to ensure that this issue comes to the forefront and we really get down to the bottom of how badly Canadians are being impacted. And most importantly, how do we protect Canadians?
I think the only counter to that, Joyce, is that there have been other inquiries conducted in which we sort of get to the bottom of it and then there are recommendations made, and they are not necessarily heeded. We've even witnessed some inquiries recently where in Nova Scotia, for example, or when it comes to the Emergencies Act, there's big fanfare around the process, which is good. Sunlight is good and disinfectant. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot of scrutiny around how does the government do following up on that. So whether it would actually address the big issue in front of us, I think is another question to ask.
Well, yes, and I mean, and I think people are still scratching their heads wondering what is the difference between a public inquiry and what Mr. Johnston suggested yesterday. And you're quite right. The Prime Minister said he would follow his suggestions or his recommendations. He is not obligated in any way. But I would like to go back to the offer to the party leaders to look at this information. And, you know, I beg to differ that if they have this information, they won't be able to ask questions, because actually they don't have this information right now, and they are asking questions. Therefore, they would not stop them from asking certain questions. It would stop them from divulging what they found out. And probably, if they did find out, this conversation could move ahead. So we're at a standstill now. It's just sort of like a dead end. There will not be a public inquiry, at least not so far. The public hearings are kind of meh, and we're not anywhere closer to finding out how and why this is happening in Canada, who really is targeted, what exactly and what actually is happening. We know very little. So, you know, they sit in Parliament, we vote, we elect them to sit there and to represent us. My vote would be, go look at those documents, because information is always power. And no matter what part of you is silenced, you will still be able to ask pertinent questions, because today they have none of that information, and yet they are asking questions. So why would, knowing that...
But I think because it's classified, right? So
yes,
if all of a sudden you get all the details about...
divulge them.
Yeah, so
but
how can you...
Yesterday, Mr. Johnston, who saw all those documents, talked quite a bit about it.
But not that much. He didn't give us any of his reasons for reaching the conclusions other than, I talked to the Prime Minister, I talked to the ministers,
but it would be
and I
good
saw some documents.
That more than 3 people would see this information. I would say, go look at the information, and then we can talk about it. Maybe they can push to have it declassified, as some of the guests suggested.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be sensible for them to look at what information is out there and to weigh it, and then to say, okay, we need to declassify some of this information so that Canadians, Canadians can see it. I don't see why the no is so categoric. And is it a trap? Maybe. It is a trap, as Mr. Blanchet said today, the leader of the Bloc. But you have an opportunity that very few Canadians have. I say you take the opportunity and then see what you do with